Mother Bear became blood donor for rare disease, research to help babies. Everyone was in tears. The morning mist clung to the forest floor like a whispered secret, and Dr. Ethan Marshall stood at his laboratory window, watching the world wake up in slow motion. His coffee had grown cold in his hands hours ago, but he barely noticed. The remote research facility nestled deep in the Montana wilderness had been his refuge for 3 years now, a place where he could lose himself in work and forget the ache that lived permanently in his chest. The trees swayed gently in the early breeze, their leaves catching the first golden rays of sunlight that managed to pierce through the thick canopy above. Ethan had chosen this isolated sanctuary deliberately. After losing his infant daughter to a rare genetic disease 2 years ago, he couldn't bear the noise and chaos of the city hospital where he used to work. Here, surrounded by nothing but endless forest and the occasional call of a distant bird, he could focus entirely on his research. He was developing treatments for pediatric genetic disorders, the same condition that had taken his little Emma from him. Every day, he worked with a quiet desperation, hoping that maybe, just maybe, he could save other families from the heartbreak he knew all too well. The facility was small but well-equipped, funded by a private foundation that understood the importance of his work. Besides Ethan, there were only 3 other researchers on the team. Lily Morgan, a young geneticist with bright eyes and an infectious optimism that sometimes made Ethan's heart hurt with its reminder of happier times. She had joined the team 6 months ago, fresh out of graduate school, full of hope and determination. Then there was Dr. Sarah Chen, a biochemist in her 40s who had left a prestigious position at Johns Hopkins to work on this project. She was quiet and methodical, understanding Ethan's need for solitude while still being a steady, reliable presence. The 4th member was Jake, their lab technician, a former park ranger who knew these woods better than anyone, and kept their equipment running smoothly. As Ethan stared out at the forest, something caught his eye. At the edge of the clearing, where the thick pine trees created a natural border around their facility, a large shape moved slowly between the shadows. He leaned closer to the window, squinting through the morning haze. It was a bear, massive and dark brown, moving with the careful, measured steps of an animal that knew exactly where it was going. But what struck Ethan as odd was that the bear wasn't foraging or wandering aimlessly. Instead, it walked directly to a specific spot about 50 yards from the building and simply sat down. The bear positioned herself facing the laboratory, her large head tilted slightly as if she was studying the building with the same intensity that Ethan was studying her. She wasn't aggressive or agitated. There was something almost peaceful about her posture, the way she sat with her front paws planted firmly on the ground, her dark eyes fixed on the windows of the facility. Ethan had seen plenty of bears during his time here, but they were usually just passing through, searching for food or following familiar trails through their territory. This was different. This felt intentional. He watched for nearly an hour, fascinated despite himself. The bear never moved from her spot, never showed any sign of restlessness or boredom. She simply sat and watched, as if she was waiting for something or someone. When Lily arrived for work around 9, Ethan called her over to the window. Her eyes widened with wonder when she saw their unexpected visitor. "Oh my goodness, she's beautiful," Lily whispered, pressing her face close to the glass. "Look at the size of her. She must be the mother of that cub we've been seeing around here lately." Indeed, as if summoned by Lily's words, a smaller shape emerged from behind the large bear. A young cub, probably born earlier that spring, tumbled playfully around his mother's massive form. But even the cub's antics couldn't distract the mother bear from her focused observation of the building. "I've never seen behavior like this," Ethan murmured, genuinely puzzled. Bears don't just sit and stare at buildings. They're either looking for food, protecting their territory, or moving through to somewhere else. But she's not doing any of those things. Dr. Chen joined them at the window, adjusting her glasses as she studied the scene. "Maybe she's just curious about us," she suggested. "Bears are intelligent animals. Perhaps our presence here has piqued her interest." But as the morning wore on, it became clear that this wasn't simple curiosity. The bear remained in her chosen spot for over 3 hours, barely shifting position except to occasionally nuzzle her cub when he wandered too far from her side. Her gaze never left the building, and there was something almost human in her patient, watchful demeanor. It was as if she was trying to communicate something important, but none of them could understand what that might be. When lunchtime came, the bear finally stood up, stretched her massive frame, and disappeared back into the forest with her cub following close behind. Ethan found himself oddly disappointed by her departure, as if he had been on the verge of understanding something significant that had now slipped away from him. "Do you think she'll come back?" Lily asked, still staring at the empty spot where the bear had been sitting. "I don't know," Ethan replied honestly, "but I have a feeling we haven't seen the last of her." He was right. The next morning, as Ethan arrived at the lab before dawn, as was his habit, he glanced out the window and felt his breath catch in his throat. The bear was already there, sitting in exactly the same spot as the day before, in exactly the same position. But this time, there was something different. Her feet, arranged carefully on the ground, was a single fern frond, perfectly intact and obviously placed there deliberately. Ethan stared at the offering, his scientific mind racing to find a logical explanation, while another part of him, a part he usually kept buried deep, whispered that this was something extraordinary. Bears didn't arrange plants in neat little displays. They didn't sit vigil outside research facilities. They didn't seem to understand that humans might interpret their actions as communication. Yet, here she was, doing all of those things. When Lily and Dr. Chen arrived, they were equally amazed by the discovery. Jake, with his ranger background, was the most skeptical of the group. "Bears do weird things sometimes," he said, though his voice lacked conviction. "Maybe she's just playing with stuff she found on the ground." But even Jake had to admit that the placement of the fern was too precise, too intentional to be random. It lay perfectly straight, positioned exactly in the center of the spot where the bear sat, as if it had been measured and arranged with great care. Throughout the day, the bear maintained her vigil, occasionally standing to stretch or to tend to her cub, but always returning to the same position. Her eyes never left the building, and there was something in her gaze that made Ethan's chest tighten with emotion he couldn't quite name. It reminded him of the way his wife used to look at Emma's empty crib in those first terrible weeks after they lost her, as if sheer force of will and love could somehow bring back what was gone. That evening, after the bear had departed for the day, Ethan found himself walking out to examine the fern she had left behind. Up close, it was even more remarkable. The frond was completely undamaged, not a single leaflet bent or torn. It would have taken incredible delicacy for such a large, powerful animal to handle something so fragile without destroying it. He knelt down and carefully picked up the fern, turning it over in his hands. There was nothing obviously special about it, nothing that would explain why a wild bear had chosen to present it as some kind of offering. But as he held it, Ethan felt a strange sense of connection, as if the bear had been trying to tell him something important, something he wasn't quite ready to understand yet. The pattern continued for the rest of the week. Every morning, the bear would be waiting in her chosen spot, and every morning, there would be a new fern frond arranged carefully at her feet. The offerings were always different, some with broader leaves, others more delicate and lacy, but each one was placed with the same meticulous care. The research team found themselves planning their days around the bear's schedule, checking the window first thing each morning to see if she had returned, feeling oddly disappointed on the rare occasions when weather or other factors delayed her arrival. She had become part of their routine, mysterious presence that added an element of wonder to their daily work. Ethan began documenting the visits, taking photographs and making detailed notes about the bear's behavior. He told himself it was scientific curiosity, but deep down, he knew it was something more personal. There was something about the bear's patient, devoted watching that resonated with his own grief and determination. She seemed to understand loss and hope in a way that felt familiar to him. If you're enjoying this incredible story and want to see how this mysterious connection unfolds, make sure to stay with us. Stories like these remind us that the natural world is full of wonders we're only beginning to understand, and I'd love to hear your thoughts about what you think this amazing bear might be trying to communicate. One morning, about 2 weeks after the bear's first appearance, Ethan arrived at the lab to find something that made his heart skip a beat. The bear was there, as expected, but the offering at her feet was different. Instead of a fern frond, there were 3 smooth river stones, each about the size of a chicken egg, arranged in a perfect triangle. The stones were clearly from the nearby stream, worn smooth by years of flowing water, but their placement was unmistakably deliberate. "This is getting really strange, Doctor," Chen said when she saw the new arrangement. "It's almost like she's trying to tell us something, but we're too dense to understand what it is." Lily knelt down to examine the stones more closely. "Look at how perfectly they're positioned," she said, her voice filled with awe. "The distances between them are exactly equal. No animal arranges objects with this kind of precision by accident." Jake scratched his head, his skepticism finally beginning to waver. "In all my years working with wildlife, I've never seen anything like this. Bears are smart, sure, but this level of intentional behavior, this consistency, it's just not normal." Ethan found himself spending more and more time watching the bear, studying her movements, trying to decipher the meaning behind her actions. There was something hauntingly familiar about her devotion, the way she returned day after day with her offerings, never giving up, never losing faith that somehow, some way, her message would be understood. It reminded him of his own daily ritual of coming to the lab, of his relentless pursuit of a cure for the disease that had taken Emma. Both he and the bear seemed driven by the same desperate hope, the same refusal to accept that some things couldn't be changed or healed. The stones remained in their triangular formation for 3 days, and then the bear's offerings changed again. This time, she brought a small piece of birch bark, rolled into a tight scroll, and placed carefully at the center of where the stones had been. The bark was pristine, obviously selected with great care from the many pieces that littered the forest floor. "She's definitely trying to communicate with us," Lily said, her excitement barely contained. "But what is she trying to say?" Ethan wished he knew. Each morning, he found himself looking forward to discovering what new message the bear might have left, what new piece of the puzzle she might provide. But the puzzle itself remained frustratingly unclear, a mystery that seemed to deepen rather than resolve with each passing day. The bear's cub had grown noticeably during their weeks of observation, becoming more adventurous and playful, but always staying within the protective range of his mother's watchful eye. Sometimes, Ethan would see the cub trying to imitate his mother's behavior, sitting beside her and staring at the building with the same intense focus, though his attention would inevitably wander to a butterfly or an interesting stick. There was something deeply moving about watching the mother bear's patience with her young one, the way she would gently guide him back when he strayed too far, the way she never let her own mysterious mission interfere with her primary job of keeping him safe and teaching him about the world. As autumn began to paint the forest in brilliant shades of gold and red, the bear's offerings became more elaborate. One morning, she left a carefully constructed arrangement of different colored leaves, each one placed with mathematical precision in a spiral pattern. Another day, it was a collection of small pine cones, sorted by size and arranged in ascending order. The complexity and artistry of these displays left the research team speechless. This was far beyond anything they had ever heard of in terms of animal behavior. It was as if the bear possessed an intelligence and understanding that challenged everything they thought they knew about wildlife. "We need to document this properly, Doctor," Chen said one evening as they reviewed the photographs and notes they had been keeping. "This could revolutionize our understanding of animal cognition and communication." But Ethan found himself reluctant to share their discovery with the outside world. There was something sacred about the bear's visits, something that felt too precious and fragile to expose to the scrutiny of the scientific community. He worried that publicity might drive her away, might break whatever delicate connection had formed between them. More than that, he had begun to feel a personal responsibility toward the bear, a sense that her message was meant specifically for him and his team. He couldn't shake the feeling that she had chosen them deliberately, that her presence here was not random but purposeful in ways he was only beginning to understand. The bear's behavior remained consistent, even as the weather grew colder and food became scarcer. Every morning she would appear at the same time, in the same spot, with a new offering that seemed to build upon the previous ones in some incomprehensible pattern. Her dedication never wavered. Her faith in whatever she was trying to accomplish never seemed to dim. Watching her, Ethan found himself thinking about his own journey, his own refusal to give up despite the setbacks and disappointments that marked his research. Like the bear, he returned to the same place every day, driven by hope and determination, believing that persistence and devotion might eventually lead to breakthrough. The parallel was not lost on him, and he began to wonder if perhaps that was part of what the bear was trying to communicate. Maybe her message was not about specific information or requests, but about the power of unwavering commitment, about the importance of never giving up on the things that matter most. As the first snows began to dust the forest floor, the bear's offerings took on a new quality. She began bringing items that seemed to tell a story, objects that appeared to be connected in ways that suggested narrative rather than random collection. A smooth stone paired with a delicate flower, a piece of bark wrapped around a single blade of grass, a cluster of berries arranged next to a perfectly preserved leaf. Each combination seemed meaningful, purposeful, but the meaning remained tantalizingly out of reach. Ethan found himself staying late at the lab, studying the photographs and trying to find patterns, connections, some key that might unlock the mystery of what the bear was trying to tell them. His colleagues began to worry about his obsession with their mysterious visitor. Lily would find him at his desk at all hours, surrounded by printouts of the bear's offerings, muttering to himself as he tried to decode what he was convinced was a deliberate message. "Ethan, you need to get some sleep," she would say gently. "The bear will still be there tomorrow." But Ethan couldn't rest. Something about the bear's patient, persistent communication had awakened something in him, a sense of purpose and connection that he hadn't felt since Emma's death. For the first time in years, he felt like he was on the verge of understanding something profound, something that might change everything. The bear seemed to sense his growing attention and interest. Her offerings became more frequent, sometimes appearing twice in a single day. She would arrive in the morning with one arrangement, then return in the afternoon with something completely different, as if she was trying to provide more information, more pieces of whatever puzzle she was presenting. One particularly cold morning in late October, Ethan arrived at the lab to find the most elaborate offering yet. The bear had created an intricate mandala-like pattern using dozens of different natural objects. Stones, leaves, twigs, berries, and pieces of bark were arranged in concentric circles, each ring containing items of similar size and color. The precision and artistry of the design took his breath away. At the center of the mandala was something that made Ethan's heart race with excitement and confusion. It was a small tuft of fur, obviously, from the bear herself, placed with the same careful attention as everything else in the display. "She's giving us part of herself," Lily whispered when she saw it. "This isn't just communication anymore. This is offering. This is sacrifice." Ethan stared at the fur, his mind racing with possibilities and implications. Why would a wild animal offer part of itself to complete strangers? What could possibly motivate such behavior? And why did he have the strangest feeling that this particular offering was different, more significant than all the others that had come before? As he knelt down to examine the mandala more closely, the bear emerged from the forest and took her usual position. But this time, instead of simply watching the building, she looked directly at Ethan through the window. Their eyes met across the distance, and for a moment that seemed to stretch into eternity, he felt a connection so profound and unexpected that it left him shaken. In that gaze, he saw intelligence, purpose, and something that looked remarkably like hope. The bear was not just leaving random offerings or trying to communicate in some vague, instinctual way. She was trying to tell him something specific, something important, something that required him to look beyond the obvious and trust in possibilities he had never considered before. The moment stretched between them. Human and bear locked in a silent communication that transcended species and logic. Ethan felt tears prick at his eyes, though he couldn't have explained why. There was something in the bear's steady, patient gaze that reminded him of every moment he had spent hoping for a miracle. Every night he had stayed up late in the lab searching for answers. Every prayer he had whispered for the children he was trying to save. And suddenly, with a clarity that took his breath away, Ethan realized that maybe, just maybe, the bear was trying to help him find those answers. Chapter 2. The Unspoken Message. The realization hit Ethan like a physical blow, leaving him standing at the window long after the bear had disappeared back into the forest with her cub. The idea seemed impossible, ridiculous even, but he couldn't shake the feeling that somehow, in some way he didn't yet understand, this magnificent creature was connected to his work, to his search for answers that had consumed his life for the past 3 years. That evening, he found himself poring over his research notes with new eyes, looking for connections he might have missed, patterns that might relate to the bear's mysterious behavior. His work focused on a rare genetic condition called Moreau-Chen syndrome, a devastating disease that affected fewer than 1 in a million newborns. Children born with the syndrome lacked a crucial enzyme that helped their bodies process certain proteins, leading to a cascade of health problems that were almost always fatal within the first year of life. Emma had been one of those children. Despite every treatment available, despite the best medical minds in the country working on her case, she had lived only 8 months. The memory of those final weeks, watching his perfect, beautiful daughter slowly fade away while he stood helpless beside her crib, had driven him to dedicate his life to finding a cure that might save other families from the same heartbreak. The research was painstakingly slow and often frustrating. The syndrome was so rare that finding enough cases to study was nearly impossible, and the genetic mechanisms involved were incredibly complex. Ethan had made some progress, identifying several promising treatment approaches, but he was still years away from anything that could be tested in clinical trials. As he sat in his lab that night, surrounded by genetic charts and protein models, he found his thoughts returning again and again to the bear's steady, knowing gaze. There had been something in her eyes that suggested understanding, as if she somehow knew about his work, his purpose, his desperate need to find answers. The next morning brought another surprise. The bear arrived earlier than usual, and her offering was unlike anything she had left before. Instead of the carefully arranged natural objects they had grown accustomed to, she had brought something that made Ethan's scientific training rebel against what his eyes were telling him. Lying at her feet was a small collection of what appeared to be medicinal plants, species that Ethan recognized from his botanical studies but had never seen growing in this particular region. There was echinacea, known for its immune-boosting properties, willow bark that contained natural pain relievers, and several other plants that had been used for centuries in traditional healing practices. "This is impossible, Doctor," Chen said, kneeling down to examine the plants more closely. "Some of these species don't even grow in Montana. How could a bear possibly know to collect them, let alone understand their medicinal properties?" Lily was practically vibrating with excitement. "Maybe she doesn't understand their properties in the way we do, but animals have instincts about healing that we're only beginning to appreciate. Dogs can detect cancer, dolphins help injured members of their pods, elephants have been observed using plants to treat various ailments." But Jake, ever the practical voice of reason, shook his head. Even if bears had some kind of instinctual knowledge about medicinal plants, which is a huge stretch, how do you explain the fact that she brought plants that don't grow anywhere near here? She would have had to travel hundreds of miles to collect some of these. The mystery deepened over the following days as the bear continued to bring increasingly sophisticated offerings. One morning, it was a collection of different types of tree sap, each one known to have specific healing properties. Another day, she brought various minerals and stones that Ethan recognized from his chemistry background as containing trace elements important for biological processes. The precision and purpose behind these offerings was undeniable. This was not random foraging or instinctual behavior. The bear was deliberately collecting specific items and presenting them in a way that suggested she understood their significance and relevance to the work being done inside the laboratory. Ethan found himself spending hours each day watching the bear, studying her movements, trying to understand the logic behind her choices. She would arrive in the morning, arrange her offering with the same meticulous care as always, then settle into her watching position. But now, instead of simply staring at the building, she seemed to be watching him specifically, her dark eyes tracking his movements when he appeared at the window. The connection between them grew stronger with each passing day. Sometimes, Ethan would step outside onto the small deck that extended from the laboratory, and the bear would shift her position slightly to maintain eye contact with him. She never showed any sign of fear or aggression, never moved closer to the building, or gave any indication that she might be a threat. She simply watched and waited, as if she was trying to tell him something important and was patiently giving him time to understand. Dr. Chen began researching everything she could find about unusual animal behavior, looking for precedents that might explain what they were witnessing. She found scattered reports of animals acting in ways that seemed to suggest intelligence and purpose beyond normal instinctual behavior, but nothing that came close to matching the complexity and consistency of their bear's actions. There are documented cases of animals seeking out humans when they're injured or in distress, she reported to the team one evening. Dolphins have been known to approach boats when they need help removing fishing nets or hooks. There are stories of wild animals bringing their sick or injured young to veterinarians or wildlife rehabilitators. But this is different, Ethan said, studying the latest photographs of the bear's offerings. She's not asking for help. She's offering it. It's like she knows what we're working on and is trying to provide us with the tools we need to succeed. The idea sounded crazy when he said it out loud, but the evidence was becoming harder and harder to dismiss. Each offering seemed more targeted, more specific to their research needs. The bear was somehow aware of their work on genetic diseases and was trying to contribute to their efforts in the only way she could. Lily had begun cataloging and testing the various substances the bear brought, and the results were fascinating. Many of the plants contained compounds that had known effects on genetic expression and protein synthesis. The minerals included several rare earth elements that were being studied for their potential role in gene therapy. Even the tree saps contained complex, organic molecules that showed promise for treating genetic disorders. "It's like she's providing us with a natural pharmacy," Lily said, her voice filled with wonder. "Everything she brings has some potential connection to genetic research and therapeutic development." But the most remarkable discovery came when they began analyzing samples of the bear's own fur that she had left in several of her offerings. The genetic analysis revealed something that left the entire team speechless. The bear's DNA contained a unique mutation that produced an enzyme remarkably similar to the one that children with Moreau-Chen syndrome were missing. Not identical, but close enough that it might serve as a template for developing a synthetic version that could be used in treatment. "This can't be a coincidence," Ethan said, staring at the genetic analysis results. "She somehow knows what we need, and she's been trying to give it to us all along." The implications were staggering. If they could study the bear's enzyme production and find a way to replicate it, they might be able to develop a treatment for the syndrome that had taken Emma's life and continued to claim the lives of other children around the world. But the ethical questions were enormous. How could they possibly ask a wild animal to participate in medical research? How could they even begin to explain what they needed or get her consent for the procedures that would be required? As if sensing their dilemma, the bear's behavior began to change in subtle ways. Instead of maintaining her usual distance, she started moving slightly closer to the building each day. Her offerings became more frequent and more personal, including items that seemed to have no scientific value but carried emotional weight, like perfectly preserved flowers or unusually beautiful stones. One morning, she brought something that made Ethan's heart stop. Lying carefully arranged at her feet was a small collection of items that told an unmistakable story. There was a tiny pine cone, no bigger than Ethan's thumb, next to a much larger one. A small, delicate flower placed beside a mature bloom of the same species. A young twig lying parallel to an older, thicker branch. The message was clear. Mother and child, young and old, the continuation of life from one generation to the next. The bear was telling them about her cub, about the universal drive to protect and nurture the young, about the connections that bound all living creatures together in the great web of existence. Tears streamed down Ethan's face as he understood what she was trying to communicate. She knew about loss, about the fierce love that parents felt for their children, about the desperate need to protect them from harm. She was telling him that she understood his pain and his purpose, that she wanted to help him save other children the way no one had been able to save Emma. That afternoon, for the first time since the bear had started visiting, Ethan stepped outside, while she was still there. He moved slowly, carefully, making no sudden movements that might startle her or cause her to flee. The bear watched his approach with calm, steady eyes, showing no sign of fear or aggression. When he reached the edge of the deck, still a safe distance from where she sat, Ethan spoke to her in a quiet, gentle voice. "I don't know how you understand what we're doing here," he said, feeling slightly foolish but somehow compelled to try to communicate with her. "But if you really do know, if you really want to help, I need you to know that what we're asking would be difficult and potentially dangerous." The bear tilted her head slightly, as if she was listening to every word. Her cub, who had been playing nearby, moved closer to his mother and sat down beside her, both of them facing Ethan with identical expressions of patient attention. "We would need samples of your blood," Ethan continued, his voice breaking slightly with emotion. "We would need to study your genetic makeup and try to replicate the enzyme you produce. It would mean trusting us completely, putting your life in our hands." For a long moment, bear and human regarded each other across the small distance that separated them. Then, in a gesture that took Ethan's breath away, the bear slowly stood up and walked closer to the building, stopping just a few feet from the deck where he stood. She looked up at him with eyes that seemed to hold all the wisdom and compassion in the world, and Ethan knew with absolute certainty that she understood exactly what he was asking, and was willing to give whatever was needed to help save the children who suffered from the same genetic fate that her own unique biology had somehow overcome. The next few days passed in a blur of preparation and planning. The team worked around the clock to design a protocol that would allow them to collect the samples they needed while ensuring the bears' safety and comfort. They consulted with veterinarians, wildlife biologists, and animal behaviorists, trying to develop an approach that would minimize stress and risk. Dr. Chen contacted colleagues at other research institutions, sharing their discovery and seeking advice on the best methods for working with wild animals in a research context. The response was universally amazement and skepticism, but also genuine excitement about the potential breakthrough they might be on the verge of achieving. Meanwhile, the bear continued her daily visits, but her behavior had shifted noticeably. She seemed more relaxed, more trusting, often bringing her cub closer to the building and allowing him to play in full view of the researchers. Her offerings became simpler but more personal, often consisting of just a single, perfect object that seemed chosen for its beauty rather than any scientific significance. Lily spent hours researching everything she could find about bear behavior and cognition, trying to understand how such a remarkable level of intelligence and empathy was possible. What she found challenged many assumptions about animal consciousness and communication. "Bears are incredibly intelligent animals," she reported to the team. "They have excellent memories, complex social structures, and problem-solving abilities that rival those of primates. There are documented cases of bears displaying what can only be described as empathy, helping other animals in distress even when there's no obvious benefit to themselves. But this goes beyond anything that's been documented before," Dr. Chen pointed out. "The level of understanding she's showing, the way she seems to comprehend our research goals and actively contribute to them, it's unprecedented." Jake, who had initially been the most skeptical member of the team, had become one of the bears' strongest advocates. His background in wildlife management gave him a deep appreciation for the trust she was showing by allowing them to get so close to her and her cub. "In all my years working with wild animals, I've never seen anything like this," he said. "The fact that she's bringing her cub around us, that she's willing to approach the building, that she's maintained this pattern of behavior for months now. It shows a level of trust and understanding that's almost human in its complexity." As the day approached when they would attempt to collect the samples they needed, Ethan found himself struggling with doubts and fears. What if they were wrong about the bear's intentions? What if their attempt to help her participate in their research ended up harming her or destroying the remarkable connection they had built? But every morning, when he saw her waiting patiently in her usual spot with her latest offering arranged carefully at her feet, his resolve strengthened. She was trusting them with something precious beyond measure, and he was determined not to let her down. The bear seemed to sense that something important was about to happen. Her offerings became more elaborate and meaningful, as if she was trying to communicate as much as possible before some crucial moment arrived. One morning, she brought a collection of items that told the story of healing and renewal. A broken twig that had grown back stronger, a flower that had bloomed despite growing in rocky soil, a stone that had been worn smooth by years of flowing water. The message was clear. Healing was possible. Strength could emerge from brokenness, and time and patience could transform even the hardest obstacles into something beautiful and smooth. On the morning of the planned procedure, Ethan arrived at the lab before dawn, his stomach tight with nervousness and anticipation. The team had prepared everything meticulously, setting up a comfortable area outside where the bear could remain calm and relaxed during the brief procedure. They had consulted with experts, practiced their techniques, and prepared for every contingency they could think of. As the sun began to rise through the forest canopy, painting the clearing in soft golden light, the bear appeared at the edge of the trees. But this time, something was different. Instead of carrying an offering in her mouth or arranging objects on the ground, she walked directly toward the building, her cub following close behind. She stopped just a few feet from where Ethan stood waiting, and for a moment that seemed to last forever, they looked into each other's eyes. In her steady, patient gaze, he saw trust, understanding, and something that looked remarkably like hope. She was ready to give them the gift that might save countless children's lives, and she was trusting them to use it wisely. The bear slowly lowered herself to the ground, lying down in a position that would make the procedure as easy and stress-free as possible. Her cub settled beside her, and both of them looked up at Ethan with expressions of complete trust and faith. As Dr. Chen approached with the equipment they would need, and Lily prepared to monitor the bear's vital signs throughout the procedure, Ethan felt tears streaming down his face. This magnificent, intelligent, compassionate creature was about to give them the key to saving lives, and she was doing it willingly, knowingly, out of some deep understanding of their shared purpose and their mutual love for the young ones who needed protection. The procedure itself would be quick and simple, but the implications of what was about to happen would echo through the scientific community and potentially change the lives of countless families around the world. As Ethan knelt down beside the bear and gently placed his hand on her massive head, he whispered a promise that he would spend the rest of his life trying to fulfill. "Thank you," he said softly. "Thank you for trusting us. Thank you for understanding what we're trying to do. I promise we won't waste this gift you're giving us." The bear's eyes remained fixed on his face, calm and trusting, as if she understood every word he had spoken. And as the team prepared to begin the procedure that would unlock the secrets hidden in her remarkable blood, Ethan knew that this moment would mark the beginning of something extraordinary, something that would bridge the gap between species and prove that compassion and understanding could transcend every boundary that separated one living being from another. The laboratory fell into an unusual quiet as Dr. Chen carefully prepared the blood collection equipment. Ethan had insisted they use the gentlest possible approach, veterinary-grade supplies designed specifically for large mammals, with sedation options available if the bear showed any signs of distress. But as he watched her lying calmly on the soft blanket they had spread on the ground, her cub nestled peacefully beside her, he realized that sedation would not be necessary. The bear's breathing was steady and relaxed, her eyes alert but trusting, as if she understood exactly what was happening, and had made peace with her decision to help them. The morning air was crisp and clean, filled with the scent of pine and the distant sound of the stream that wound through the forest behind their facility. Lily knelt beside the bear's head, gently stroking the thick fur behind her ears and speaking in soothing tones. The bear seemed to appreciate the comfort, occasionally turning her massive head to nuzzle Lily's hand with surprising gentleness. Jake stood ready with emergency supplies, though his ranger's instincts told him they wouldn't be needed. This animal was here by choice, participating in something she somehow understood was important. Dr. Chen approached with the collection kit, moving slowly and deliberately to avoid any sudden movements that might startle their patient. The bear watched her approach with calm curiosity, showing no signs of fear or aggression. When Dr. Chen knelt down beside her and began to examine her front leg to locate the best site for the blood draw, the bear simply tilted her head to get a better view of what was happening, as if she wanted to understand every step of the process. The actual collection took less than 5 minutes. The bear remained perfectly still throughout the procedure, her breathing steady and calm, her eyes fixed on Ethan's face as if drawing strength and reassurance from his presence. When Dr. Chen finished and carefully bandaged the small puncture site, the bear lifted her head to sniff at the bandage, then settled back down with what looked remarkably like satisfaction. As the team began to pack up their equipment, the bear slowly stood and stretched, testing her leg to make sure everything felt normal. Her cub immediately bounced to his feet, ready to follow his mother wherever she decided to go. But instead of heading back into the forest as they expected, the bear walked closer to where Ethan was standing and gently pressed her massive head against his chest. The gesture was so unexpected, so clearly affectionate, that Ethan felt his knees nearly buckle with emotion. He wrapped his arms around the bear's neck, feeling the incredible strength and warmth of her body, breathing in the wild, earthy scent of her fur. For a moment that seemed to exist outside of time, human and bear stood together in perfect understanding. Two beings united by their shared commitment to protecting the vulnerable and innocent. When the bear finally stepped back, she looked directly into Ethan's eyes one more time, and he could have sworn he saw something that looked like a smile in her expression. Then she turned and walked slowly back toward the forest, her cub bounding playfully alongside her, both of them disappearing into the shadows between the trees, as if they had never been there at all. The blood samples were rushed to the laboratory for immediate analysis, and within hours the team had confirmation of what they had hoped, but hardly dared to believe. The bear's blood contained not just the enzyme they had identified earlier, but an entire cascade of related proteins that worked together to process the genetic materials that children with Moreau-Chen syndrome couldn't handle on their own. More remarkably, the bear's immune system had developed a unique way of producing these enzymes that made them incredibly stable and long-lasting. While human-produced versions of similar enzymes typically broke down within hours of being introduced into the bloodstream, the bear's versions remained active for days or even weeks. Dr. Chen worked through the night, analyzing protein structures and mapping genetic sequences, her excitement growing with each new discovery. By morning, she had identified the specific genetic mechanisms that allowed the bear's body to produce these remarkable healing compounds, and she believed she knew how to replicate the process in a laboratory setting. The implications were staggering. If they could synthesize the bear's enzymes and develop them into a treatment protocol, they wouldn't just be offering hope to children with Moreau-Chen syndrome. The same approach might work for dozens of other genetic disorders that affected enzyme production and protein processing. Lily began working on computer models that would help them understand how the bear's enzymes might interact with human biology. The initial results were incredibly promising. The enzymes appeared to be compatible with human cellular processes, and there were no obvious signs that they would trigger immune responses or cause harmful side effects. Jake, meanwhile, had taken on the task of monitoring the area where the bear had been visiting, making sure she had returned safely to her normal territory and showed no signs of distress from the procedure. To his relief and amazement, he found evidence that she was thriving. Her tracks showed the confident, purposeful movement of a healthy animal, and he occasionally caught glimpses of her and her cub playing together in the meadows near the stream. But the most remarkable discovery came 3 weeks later, when Jake reported that the bear had returned to her old watching post at the edge of the clearing. She wasn't bringing offerings anymore, and she didn't stay for hours as she had before. Instead, she would appear for just a few minutes each morning, long enough to look toward the laboratory building and acknowledge the people inside, then disappear back into the forest. It was as if she was checking on their progress, making sure they were using her gift wisely, maintaining the connection that had brought them together in the first place. Ethan found these brief visits deeply moving, a reminder of the trust she had placed in them and the responsibility they bore to make her sacrifice meaningful. The research progressed with remarkable speed. Within 2 months, they had successfully synthesized a stable version of the bear's key enzyme and begun testing it in laboratory cultures of cells affected by Moreau-Chen syndrome. The results exceeded their wildest hopes. The synthetic enzyme not only replaced the missing protein function but actually worked more effectively than the natural human version would have. Dr. Chen submitted their findings to the most prestigious medical journals, and the response was immediate and overwhelming. Research institutions around the world wanted to collaborate on developing the treatment further. Pharmaceutical companies offered massive funding to support clinical trials. Government health agencies fast-tracked their applications for experimental treatment protocols. But through it all, Ethan never forgot the source of their breakthrough. Every morning, he would look out at the spot where the bear used to sit and remember the trust she had shown, the gift she had given, the bridge she had built between species that had allowed this miracle to happen. The first clinical trials began 6 months after the bear's blood donation, and the results were nothing short of miraculous. Children who had been given death sentences by their genetic condition began to show improvement within days of receiving the treatment. Their bodies started producing the enzymes they needed, their symptoms began to reverse, and for the first time in medical history, Moreau-Chen syndrome became a treatable condition rather than a fatal one. Ethan stood in the hospital room, watching a 6-month-old baby girl take her first healthy breaths in weeks, and felt the grief he had carried for Emma begin to transform into something else. Not forgetting, never forgetting, but healing. The bear's gift had not only saved this child and the dozens of others in the trial, but had given meaning to Emma's brief life and to all the pain that had followed her death. The treatment protocol was approved for widespread use within a year, and the bear's enzymes became the foundation for an entire new class of genetic therapies. Children around the world who would have died from rare genetic conditions were now living healthy, normal lives, all because of the wisdom and compassion of a wild animal who had somehow understood what needed to be done and had been willing to do it. As word of the story spread, the bear became something of a legend. Scientists called her contribution one of the most important interspecies collaborations in medical history. Ethicists debated the implications of her apparent understanding and consent. Philosophers wondered what her actions revealed about the nature of consciousness and empathy in the animal kingdom. But for Ethan and his team, she remained simply the magnificent creature who had chosen to trust them with her most precious gift. They established a research fund in her honor, dedicated to studying the healing wisdom that might exist in other species, and they made sure that a portion of all profits from the treatment went to wildlife conservation efforts in her home territory. The bear continued her occasional morning visits for several years, always brief, always peaceful, a living reminder of the connection that had made their breakthrough possible. Her cub grew into a strong, healthy adult, and eventually had cubs of his own, and sometimes the entire family would appear at the edge of the clearing. 3 generations linked by the bond that had started with one mother's extraordinary act of compassion. Dr. Chen often said that the bear had taught them as much about the nature of healing as she had about the science of genetics. Her patient persistence, her willingness to trust, her understanding that some gifts are too important to withhold, had shown them that medicine was not just about technology and technique, but about the connections that bind all living things together in a web of mutual care and responsibility. Lily, who had gone on to become a leading researcher in interspecies medical collaboration, always credited the bear with opening her eyes to the vast untapped wisdom that existed in the natural world. She spent her career studying how animals healed themselves and each other, discovering dozens of new treatments and therapies that had their origins in the behavior of wild creatures. Jake left his position at the research facility to become a full-time wildlife conservationist, dedicating his life to protecting the habitats where creatures like their bear could live and thrive. He often said that watching her trust and generosity had convinced him that humans had a responsibility to be worthy of such gifts, to protect and preserve the sources of wisdom that the natural world offered so freely. As for Ethan, he continued his research for many more years, but he never forgot the lesson the bear had taught him about the power of hope and persistence. Every child he helped, every family he saved from the heartbreak he had known, was a testament to her wisdom and compassion. He kept a photograph of her on his desk, a reminder that the most important discoveries often came not from human intelligence alone, but from the willingness to listen to the wisdom that surrounded them in the natural world. The bear lived a long and healthy life in the forest she had never truly left, raising her cubs and their cubs, teaching them the ancient wisdom of their kind while carrying within her blood the secret that had saved countless human lives. She became a bridge between worlds, a living symbol of what was possible when different species found ways to understand and help each other. When she finally passed away peacefully in her sleep, many years after that first morning, when she had appeared at the edge of the clearing with a fern frond in her mouth, the forest seemed to mourn her passing. But her legacy lived on in every child who drew breath because of her gift, every family that stayed together because of her compassion, every researcher who was inspired by her example to look beyond the boundaries of their own species for answers to the challenges that faced them all. The treatment she had made possible went on to save thousands of lives and became the foundation for an entire new field of medicine. But perhaps more importantly, her story changed the way humans thought about their relationship with the natural world, proving that wisdom and compassion were not uniquely human traits, but part of the deeper intelligence that connected all living things in an endless web of mutual care and support. Years later, when Ethan was an old man and the research facility had become a world-renowned center for interspecies medical collaboration, he would still take his morning walk to the spot where the bear used to sit. He would stand there in the quiet of the early dawn, remembering her patient presence and the extraordinary gift she had given, and he would whisper a prayer of gratitude for the day when a wild creature had looked into his heart and seen the healing that needed to happen. The forest around the facility had been preserved as a wildlife sanctuary, protected in perpetuity by the foundation that had grown out of their research. Scientists from around the world came to study there, hoping to discover other examples of the kind of interspecies wisdom that had made their breakthrough possible. Some succeeded, finding new treatments and therapies in the behavior and biology of wild animals, but none ever matched the profound simplicity and power of the bear's original gift. In the end, the bear had given them more than just the key to treating a genetic disease. She had given them a new understanding of what it meant to be part of the larger community of life on Earth, a reminder that healing and wisdom could come from the most unexpected sources, and proof that love and compassion were not limited by the boundaries of species or the constraints of language. Her story became a legend that was passed down through generations of researchers and healers, a reminder that the most important discoveries often began not with complex theories or sophisticated equipment, but with the simple willingness to pay attention to the world around them and to trust in the wisdom that existed in forms they might never have imagined. The children who lived because of her gift grew up to become doctors and scientists, teachers and parents, carrying forward the legacy of her compassion in countless ways. They told their own children about the bear who had saved their lives, and those children grew up with a deeper understanding of their connection to the natural world and their responsibility to protect and preserve it for future generations. And somewhere in the vast network of life that connected every creature on Earth, the bear's spirit lived on, a reminder that the greatest gifts were often given freely, without expectation of reward or recognition, out of the simple understanding that all life was precious, and that helping others heal was the most noble purpose any being could serve.